Do you know what this is? Can you tell just by looking at that how it's going to sound, how it's constructed, without playing it? I don't want you to play it. We're going to look at that in this session, and by the end of the session, you are going to have the ability to glance at that and say, hey, I know what that is, long before you even play it. That's pretty cool. We'll hit that up in the session, coming right back. Hi guys, Steve Dempster here, back at you with session 11. My goodness, I can't believe we've come this far in, you know, a relatively short period of time. And I want to thank you for taking the time to read through the PDFs, listening to the videos. I very much appreciate your comments that you're sending along, letting me know that the stuff that you're getting is working for you, that it kind of, I won't use the word theory, but I'll use the word theory, that it tends to make learning the theory side of how music works a little bit more fun. I call it analysis. You know that by now already. I've got my tea, and I'm going to have a sip of it right now. Because I'm Irish, I have to have my tea. And we're going to dig right in to today's session. So here we go. Grab a pick, grab a guitar. Now, at the beginning of today's lesson, I asked you the question, did you know what that thing was? Just by looking at it. And if you're unclear, that's okay. That's perfectly normal, because I'm asking you to view something from a different angle than you're normally used to, which is looking down on your guitar. And of course, you don't have the benefit of muscle memory trying to help you recall something, and you don't have the benefit of sound. But if I showed you this image, that should look a little more familiar to you by now. I hope it does anyway. So if you analyze that sucker, look what you're looking at. Draw on the knowledge that you already have. Hey, I see a tone. I see a tone, a semitone, a tone, a tone, a tone, and a semitone. That's the formula, the interval formula for a major scale. Those two images, right here, those two images are exactly the same thing, just played out differently. So here's the first one. Coming back down. Here's the second one. Now, if you think about what I just did, excuse me, you'll recognize that both examples are playing out the exact same pitch. By pitch, what I mean is the high or low of sound. For example, I didn't do this. I didn't play this scale, which you already know very well. And pay attention to the pitch of this. And then go and play this guy, which is the same scale, but it's not played at the same pitch. That is the same scale played an octave higher. Hopefully that makes some sense to you, but the point is that the two examples that we're starting with are exactly the same pitch. So if this guy, sounds exactly the same as this guy, then they must be built with the same internal architecture. In other words, they must have the exact same interval formula structure. It's a given. If they sound the same, they must have the same interval structure. When the interval structure changes, so does the sound of the scale. So, that's point one. Point two is, if you were looking at that image, the first image again, I'll put it up here on the screen, and you were aware of the notes that you were looking at, you would have gone C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Oh, well, those are the notes of the major scale, the C major scale. Right? Very straightforward. And you would have seen, of course, the same thing play out on one string. So the key feature here that I want you to start thinking about is if they're sounding identical, whether you're playing on one string or going across strings, their interval structure has to be the same. Which means what we want to get good at as guitarists is to see intervals not only linearly along the fretboard, but in position. As we cross the fretboard, you will need to develop the skill of recognizing a tone, which is otherwise referred to as a major second. So that's 2 frets, right? We know this already. I've drilled that in. That's a tone. It's also technically called a major second, but we'll think of it as a tone. So if it looks like that going this way, here, I'll do it here, and then I do this, crossing from the 6th string to the 5th string and finding the same note, C to D, C to the same D on another string, then that thing, think of it almost as a tiny little chord if you want, even though technically it isn't. It has its own shape. You need to commit that to memory so that every time you see that shape when you're crossing strings, your brain is going, oh, that's a major second, that's a tone. Cool, I can recognize the same thing going across strings, playing the scale in position, as I can recognize the same thing going linearly along one string. And I remember at the beginning of the series, I got a comment from someone on the, I think it was on the video, not the PDF, that they understood the intervals as they go along linearly along one string, and they were wondering, how then do you recognize what's going on when you go across strings? So they were on the right track in terms of thinking about what the next step is. And the truth, of course, is that every interval that you can do along one string, and we've only handled a few of them, tones and semitones especially, the octave as well, the same intervals exist going across strings, but you now have to memorize, essentially, what they look like when you cross strings. And this isn't complicated. This is the same process you would have gone through to memorize chord shapes and such, or even to memorize certain scale patterns that you already know going across strings. Because as you know, most players, when they learn their first scale, they don't tend to do it linearly. They'll play it, or they will be shown it across strings. Great case in point is our good old friend, the A minor pentatonic scale. Most people don't do this when they learn A minor pentatonic. They do this. It's all kept in position. And then you learn visually the shape of that thing and the sound of that thing, and many times without even knowing what notes you're playing. They just know that's the thing. We're different. We want to be more informed players. We want to understand the underlying foundation around which these scales are built. So that's a key feature right there, just to keep in mind that we're now going to examine what these common familiar intervals look like as we cross strings. Okay, so on page 3 of your PDF, which you can get access to in the notes below just by clicking the link, and it'll take you to a site where you can just sign up for free and get access to the PDF. In that, I start to sort of visually detail what these intervals look like. So that's what I want to spend a bit of time doing here with this particular form of the C major scale. There's many ways that you can play the C major scale along across strings, but I chose this particular shape because chances are a lot of people don't know that shape. I think they would be more familiar with this guy. Everything sort of falls very nicely under the fingers, so it's a common shape that gets taught when the major scale is getting taught. This one is less familiar to people, but clearly it's the same thing. These are all the same thing. Oops. They're all the same. Same interval, same pitch, same notes, found all over the guitar. This is the same too, but it's an octave higher. It's the same as this. This, on the other hand, is the same, but yet an octave higher. Do you see what's happening here? So, lots of different ways to play the same scale. In this case, I've chosen this guy simply because it's a little unfamiliar, I think, to most of you, and therefore it's valuable to learn it. I think in anything that you do on the guitar, the more ways you have of doing a thing or knowing about a thing, the better off you are in the long run. No matter how challenging learning that may be, the more ways you have of thinking about any one concept, the better off you are. Okay, let's break this shape down so that we understand what's happening. And we have to think in terms of notes here to convince you that the intervals we're going to discuss are actually real. So, the note I'm starting with, 8th fret, 6th string, is a C note. And typically, if we were doing this along one string, you would have said to me something like, well, from there, Steve, you have to go up a tone to a D. So that would take me from the 8th fret to the 10th fret. And that would simply be this. And you're right. That's a D. We know this already. Hopefully you know this already. It's a given. I don't want you to have to be struggling with something like that while I'm talking about something like this, because you have to have a bit of mastery on the previous concept in order to have mastery on the next concept. Again, how things are connected, where stuff is coming from. You've got to keep the big picture in mind the whole time. Nonetheless, C to D, no big deal. There it is. It's a tone. You can see it there. That's a D note. Now I can find that exact same pitch of D on the next string, the 5th string. That's just the way the guitar's wired up, pardon the pun. And that's a good thing for us because it means we have options. Sometimes options are confusing, but it gives us more creative possibilities, is how you should think about it. So instead of going to this D, I could go to, let's see if we can find that D. The string itself is A, the 5th string. So A, B, C, D. Now, compare the sound of these two Ds. I'll pick this one and hit this one. Sorry. If I can tap it straight on, okay? In pitch, they're identical. Maybe you're hearing a bit of difference between the two because one string's thicker than the other. That's color, or timbre, or timbre. We don't concern ourselves with that effect that you might hear. It's an effect of the fact that the string is thicker, so it just it colors the pitch. But the pitch is identical. Da da da, da da da. Didn't have to change my voice if I'm matching it with my voice. Da da da, da da da. Same pitch. So that means I have an option. Instead of going from C to D here, I can go from C to D there. And when I do that, these won't sound good when I play them together necessarily. Okay? But that shape of whatever note I'm on the 6th string, my brain says if I go 3 frets lower on the 5th string, 1, 2, 3, from where I am, I'm not including my count, the fret that my pinky's in. I go 1 fret lower and I count 1, 2, 3. You could see it as 1, including your finger, 2, 3, 4. If you want to conceptualize it that way, do so. However your brain works is what you want. But that shape right there, crossing strings, is also a tone. That's my point. This is a tone when you cross strings. The same effect is true when you cross from the 5th to the 4th string. Same is true when you cross from the 4th to the 3rd string. They're exactly the same shape. When I cross from the 3rd to the 2nd string, they are no longer the same shape, and this will always be true in your playing of the guitar. And if you know why that is, you get a Tootsie Roll. Some people never think on this, but there's a reason why it happens, and we don't need to go into it today, but you do need to be aware that when you cross from the 3rd string to the 2nd string, if your brain is going to say that that's a tone, it isn't. Listen to it if I do this on the 3rd string, the G string. Did I play a tone with my pinky? I played a semitone. Something weird's going on there. That weirdness we're going to explore in a later session. But just for now, know that it's a weird thing. And because we're only actually moving a semitone when we cross from the 3rd to the 2nd string, we have to actually raise the note up, or the shape up if you want to look at it, of the 2nd note in order to get the effect we want. Now look. So what I'm doing on the 3rd string is playing a tone, which is familiar to you. But when I cross over to the 2nd string, I only go from my 3rd finger, I go 2 frets down onto the next string instead of the original 3 frets down onto the next string. Okay? It's a wee bit confusing, but that's just the reality of how the guitar is tuned and strung, and we'll talk in more detail about that later. And then when you get to the 2nd string and you go to the 1st string, you're back to the original shape. Okay? So that's something I want you to be able to see. You've got to recognize that when you cross from any string and you go 3 frets lower onto the next consecutive string, that shape should register in your mind as a tone, also referred to as a major 2nd, okay? And that shape remains the same until you get to the 3rd and 2nd string, in which case you have to make that shape smaller by 1 fret. And then when you get to the 2nd and the 1st string, you're just back to where you were. And again, in the PDF, I outline that for you, so you have a visual for that reality of how things are laid out. But you have to commit that to memory. So we've got the first 2 notes of the scale. Come back to reality, Steve. We've got the first 2 notes of the scale, C and D, played across strings, and as they should be. You should expect that to be a D because your eyeballs see the movement that you made, this shape, as a tone. Do you see what I'm getting at? You almost don't even need to know the names of the notes. All you need to be able to do, like the other linear interval structure, is memorize the shapes as you go across. The notes kind of take care of themselves as long as your intervals are being played out correctly. So here we have a tone. Now after the D, of course, comes E, which is a tone away if you refer to the interval structure. Well, if that's D, then that's E. And we can use that one. It's convenient for our fingering, especially as I start on my pinky. Does that make sense? Now that same E could be found on the 4th string right there. So that wouldn't be practical if I go, because I have to do a whole position change. By position, all I mean is technically where the first finger plays the majority of the time while you're playing in a position, while you're going across strings. So here, as I do this guy, I'm playing in 5th position. But then when I go to here to play the other E, if I decided to do that, I'm now in 2nd position. It's defined by where the first finger would be if you're using it in terms of the fret location. But I don't want you to overthink that right now. For now, we're going to go C to D, which is a tone across the string. And now we can rely on our previous knowledge to tell us when I go from D to E, of course, that's a tone. I'm good. So we have 2 tones in a row, right? A tone, a tone. What follows? I'm listening. Yeah, the semitone comes next. Well, that happens to be an E. F is always next door in the key of C. So now we have our semitone. And you can see it because you're used to seeing notes that are side by side as being semitones. We've discussed that much earlier in the series. So again, you're drawing on knowledge you already have to make this thing go, to make you go when you see that thing, oh yeah, that's easy. That's the point of the whole series. So we have C, D, E, F is right next door. What's the next note after F? It's G. I could play this G, and you can hear that it sounds right, which is a tone away from F. There's F, there's G. But why don't I rely on this knowledge, that shape? 3 frets down from my pinky, 1, 2, 3, on the next consecutive string, and find the same note. Is that making sense? It's a little tougher to see the intervals going across the strings than it is going linearly. I get that. And so, you know, you have to put a little extra time into it. But you can let your ear confirm it, because if I go C, D, E, F, and G, which I don't want to do that motion, but I could. Instead, I want to go C, D, E, F, and then find that pitch of G on the next string, the 4th string. Happens to be at the 5th fret. And if you look at the shape, your brain should go, yeah, that's a tone, just as I would expect it here, which is easier to see. 2 frets is a tone on 1 string. This crossing of strings is a tone if, starting on the note I'm on, the lower sounding note, in my mind, I go 1, 2, 3 frets down, and there's my note. If I experience that, I know what I'm visually seeing is called a whole tone or a tone. I also know that by hearing it, I'm confirming that I'm on the right track. That that's a G, because I can compare those 2 Gs across the strings. To some of you, that might be a big revelation in terms of how the guitar works. Others have probably been playing long enough that you kind of know that already. So that's good. So let's summarize. Tone, tone, semitone, tone. Hey, the next one's easy. If I'm on this G and I need to go a tone to A, I can go right there on the same string. And by doing so, I'm more or less keeping the fingers all within the same position. I'm not leaving that location to find that same note somewhere else. I'm making sure I'm kind of staying in the same area. So C, D, E, F, G, A. Now I could reach up with my pinky because B's coming next. I could do that, but that's an awkward stretch. It kind of is to me anyway. It's not wrong. G, A, B, C, D, E, that's tone and a tone, semitone, tone, tone, Then I need another tone. That's why I was thinking I could go up to this B from A. That is a tone, but we're not going to do that. We're going to start on A. I'm going to play the A with my pinky, and I'm going to reach a tone down from my pinky onto the third string to find, lo and behold, the same B note. Sorry. Again, there's a color difference between the two strings. You're not interested in that. You're only interested in pitch. Da, 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 da. Voice doesn't have to change to match it. Okay? Tone, tone, semitone, then another tone, crossing strings, same string, a tone. I've used my pinky. Another tone, crossing strings, and then finally, oh my gosh, this is magic, semitone. So everything you saw in this exists within this. It has to, because they sound identical. Therefore, the structure within them has to be identical. Therefore, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That to me, like learning how chords could be constructed from a scale, that was a big revelation to me. I mentioned that a few lessons back. Big, like, aha moment. This was another one of those for me. To see this same thing unfold across strings using exactly the same architecture. It's just that you have to now have, in a sense, two different ways, minimally, to view what a tone looks like. What does it look like on one string, and what does it look like when you cross over to the next string? And it's memorized. It's a memorized event. So now that you have a visual of what a tone looks like on one string and what it looks like when you cross a string, and you have a visual of what a semitone looks like when you play on one string or you cross over to another string, which didn't show up in here. We weren't crossing semitones in this example. Let me just review that again. So we have a tone, a tone. Here's the first semitone. It's on the same string. Then we go a tone, and a tone, and then another tone, and then a semitone. So in that example, there were no semitones that you were crossing over from string to string. But if you were, C to C sharp, 1 fret up, would look like this. It's a little wider stretch. And it doesn't sound great by itself. You can hear it vibrating. It's kind of cool. Could be something bad's about to happen here. So these semitones become very useful in metal music because you get a lot of that. That quality seems to evoke heaviness, dark qualities. Is it any wonder that Steven Spielberg hired John Williams to come up with probably one of the most famous movie themes that captures it? That's a semitone. So the next time you watch Jaws, one of my favorite movies, I saw it the first time when I was 15, I think, 14 maybe. Most gruesome thing I'd ever seen up to that point. The semitone, when you play it out, seems to evoke that character in people. But the point is here, when you're crossing strings, it's a wider interval. We didn't experience that in this particular scale, but important for you to know it. And all of these relationships are played out in your PDF for you. You can see them visually there. So what I want to leave you with is at the back of the PDF, so you should get it, is a series of C notes located throughout the fretboard. And it would be useful for you to pick a C note anywhere. Let's take one here. And then play out the major scale based on knowledge of intervals. However you want. Be as creative as you want to. Doesn't matter to me, in fact, if you mix up pitches. So I can give you an example here. Here's an approach starting on C, but relying on my knowledge of intervals. So I've got a tone, and then I've got a tone. Remember when I cross this third and second string, the tone is shorter, it's smaller. Okay, I could have gone here. It's okay, but I go tone, tone. Now the next note I go to will be an F because I'm on an E right now. So I don't have to go to this F. I could go to that F. It's hard to do. It's not going to allow you to play the scale quickly, but it really verifies that you understand where the notes are on your fretboard and you're not just pandering to a shape and muscle memory, which are good things, but there's more to it than that. That's always my point. So here's what my scale looks like so far. I could go C, D, E, F. And I could go to that G, but I'm going to go way down here. G, A, B, C. That's what I mean by be creative with it. So it won't sound necessarily like a steadily rising scale. It could, but then that becomes pattern-based. And it won't take you long to just know this is how your fingers move. And you're not thinking about the notes that you're making. And in performance, that's often the truth. You're not completely thinking about that stuff anymore because you've rehearsed it so much. You know it inside and out. But as an exercise, that's the point. I'll give you another one. I'm just making these up. Here's a C right there. We could go C, D, because I know that that's a tone right there. C, D. Look, another tone to that E. Brilliant. C, D, E, go a semitone to F, go to G, go a tone to the third string, to the A, go a tone up from A to B, and then play the B to C. That's a weird looking scale, but it's kind of cool. You get the idea? You should explore that a lot so that you're really rehearsing in your mind what the tone looks like, the major second looks like when you cross a string, and what the semitone looks like when you cross a string. Remember, however, in this example, there were no semitones that were crossing strings. Any semitones that we could play were still on the same string. But should you run across situations where you do have a semitone crossing strings, again, this is played out in the PDF, you have images for this, then it would look like this. It's wider looking. There's your tone, if you can see my fingers okay. Right? There's the tone. But to make it wider, you keep this one where it is and you lower that one. There's your semitone. It's even more intense. Jaws. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Get the idea? So there we have it. We're starting now to move all our scale work to a place where we're playing in position, and for now that just means we're playing across the strings. I don't want you to abandon your knowledge of scale work on one string. In fact, when we get to the place of doing some improvising, that's as legitimate a tool, moving up and down one string to find the notes that you want, as it is playing across the string. It becomes just another creative extension of how you might express something in your playing. So it's not just theory and analysis. This stuff is on the ground, feet moving forward and running, playing music. It's just that when it gets presented the way I'm doing it, it can appear to be removed from that. Okay, there we have it. If you found this video helpful, as usual, why not subscribe to my channel? And make sure you click on the little notification bell so you're not you're getting notified of any new videos that are coming out. And if you'd like to get access to the PDF that's mentioned in this video, just go down to the notes below. There's a link there. You can click that. Give me your email, your best email, and your first name, and I'll be happy to send you the PDF totally free. The two, the video and the PDF, do complement one another, so I would advise you to get it. So there we go. We are now completing lesson 11, and we have changed our gears. This is an important moment. We are now starting to do our scale work more in position. This is the area that most people are more familiar with, and boy, do we have a lot of territory there to cover, so stay tuned. Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio. I will talk to you again very soon. Bye, guys.